crazy Steelers fans. And the day that we went back to Pittsburgh for my after I had gotten engaged to my husband, my dad gave us tickets to go to, for my husband had been Canadian. It was his first NFL game. Oh. And guess what game it was?
Immaculate Reception?
Gee.
And so, we had flown in, we didn't have a car, and my parents used to have 4 tickets, so the other people who had the 2 tickets drove us.
Yeah.
And they were saying, okay, let's leave now, the parking lot will be crazy. And my husband leaned over, he said, see, it's my first NFL game. I don't care, I'd rather stay to the end.
Yeah.
And so we said, you can go, we'll try to figure out, of course they had to stay because we were saying we were staying.
Franco Harris came through.
And they were so happy.
Oh, because we had missed that? Oh,
Yeah.
it's like, where were you? I'm like, we were
Yeah, as soon as we got
parking lot.
home, it was, did you stay? We said, yes, we saw it. Okay, I think we're all here. Let's welcome. Let's call to order the meeting of the Subdivision Subcommittee. And we, in terms of minutes, I'm getting a little concerned. Do all subcommittees maintain minutes? I mean, I feel like we have, okay. So probably we should try to catch up on the minutes at the next meeting.
Yeah, typically one of the members does the minutes.
okay.
But I can work on them if needed.
Did anyone?
And honestly, it's always just who's present. It's overall.
It's pretty much,
It's very basic.
yeah.
Because again, we have the streaming and the recording, so.
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
hoping on was.
Yeah.
I think if you look at the emails that went out about what are we talking about at this meeting,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be very extensive, it's the topics that were covered.
Okay.
If there were any votes, and there,
Okay. Well, I will, for the next meeting, bring minutes for the last, when was the last meeting we had minutes? If someone can tell me when the last meeting was we had minutes.
It's been a while.
Okay, I will try to catch us up because I'd like to have everything
I'm not
copacetic.
sure that there have been minutes since I've been on.
Okay.
There have not. I want to say,
Yeah, I think the problem started when I began sharing. So.
yeah, I think when John was here, we had minutes, and I think we still need to get some of those approved.
Okay.
But there are minutes from then.
And were you doing the minutes then, I'm guessing?
No, John was.
Oh, John was. Okay, I didn't realize that.
That's okay.
If you could just tell me, if you can send me the minutes, John, like, that haven't been approved that John did,
Yep.
and the date, then I'll know the date to start from. I can go back through the recordings and provide minutes to catch us up to date.
Okay.
So we've got several things we want to cover today. We didn't get very far on looking at Article 4 at our last meeting. But before we get into that, I'd like to just revisit the plans for the public meeting. And I worked on revising the slide deck for the public meeting. And in particular, it was expanding a little bit more the intent. I call it an intent slide of kind of why we're doing this, because I think members of the public wonder, well, yeah, there's the old, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, what are you, why are you doing this? But the section that's very challenging is how to, in a reasonable period of time, cover all of the changes that we're proposing. And I say that because I hesitate to call any particular change, insignificant, because it could be significant for someone, out there. So, I don't want to kind of categorize things unless we're correcting the spelling of a word, of a known word in the English language. So I did a series of slides to try to get how we might present this for Articles 1, 2, and 3. And because in those articles we are making insertions and changes to the existing code, it was not too difficult to do. When you get to Article 4, because in that article we are changing the overall, we're going to a different format. We're adding in some new areas or areas that previously were very lightly covered, like landscaping, like lighting. It's a bit more difficult to get it down in shorthand on a slide. So if I can just direct you to these slides. This is for Article 1, and we've for three items we didn't make any changes at all. But I'm recording this as no changes currently proposed because it could be that from the public meeting or LPC that something else comes up, and I wouldn't want someone who attended just the first meeting to assume that something wasn't ever going to be touched that may at a later date be touched. Now, the question is whether we go with an approach that, if I look at compliance, I say added a requirement for a lot grading plan and a lot grading certificate. Now, we can either make a statement like that or excerpt the exact wording that's been inserted and put it there, which makes it quite a bit longer. Do people have views on this?
Short and sweet.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially
For a PowerPoint,
Yeah.
for a PowerPoint.
Okay.
And then I think we can always have access to the versions online, or a couple paper copies, so people can look at it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that one in particular, like somebody might want to know, well, what's the purpose of that? What's the goal of that? And even if you call on me to explain
Yes.
that, I can do that quickly, I think.
Yeah.
Not saying what will happen after that.
But that's why we're having a public meeting, is to find out what will happen when people, to find out the views of the public. So, can you go to the next one, Janelle? And then, again, this is again shorthand. And then we'll add in something on enforcement, Glenn, when you...
So I actually did send something to Tom on that. Did it make it into this version?
Yes,
I remember
yeah,
the critical.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But I did this before I got that, so this will get added in. And then to the next one, this is 171, and someone needs to give me some feedback on on format of whether it's 170.1.6 or whether it's 170.1.6 in parentheses. It seems to be all over the place when I'm looking at things, so.
I think it's 170-6. Let me check definition.
170.1-6?
My 30,000-foot view of that is like, do people really care if we added definitions when
Yes,
they do?
they will.
Yes,
All right.
yeah.
I would rather, if it were me, I'd rather talk about the meat of the changes rather than
Yeah.
definitions, but I got you.
So here, instead of going through, because there are so many definitions that are being touched, I broke it out in terms of, okay, we renamed the conditional approval stage, we renamed it preliminary approval. Then we added definitions, and I took the definitions, instead of just doing alphabetically, I took, there are a whole series of definitions that were added concerning lighting, a whole series that were added for open space, a series, 2 that were added for lot grading, et cetera. And then we have definitions that were edited, and those in my mind, were fairly minor edits, just making references to things.
Just so you know, I've added a couple more when I cross-referenced the revised utility sections with the definitions, so they'll be coming
So,
through.
yeah, all of this will have to be updated once we get to the end of this.
I think it's good to
Group them the way you did.
Yeah, I like that,
Okay.
yeah.
It's like not going through a whole list of them, but saying for lighting, there were few, and streets, and, so that would make sense, I think, to me, getting
Okay.
a sense of what changed in it.
I think it makes it simpler for people.
Yeah. It's a little hard for the public because you're going to see all the definitions that have been added before we actually get to section 4, where we've added, a whole perspective on lighting, okay? Now, if we,
On landscaping, you have too many screens there. Can you just
Okay. Joe and Deborah, can you pull your mics down
Okay.
a little bit closer, please?
screen high, low, site development, or yard? I mean, just start with a screen, but just say high, low,
Okay.
site development,
Okay.
or yard, period.
okay.
Too many screens.
And I think it is just 170-6. I think it makes what, I guess,
I'm looking at
the
this and I
article's
see.
in there, but it's,
There's nowhere where article,
yeah.
is it 1 and then 170-6, or is it,
Because they're all sequential. They're from
Okay.
the beginning to the end.
okay,
Article 2 doesn't start over, so it just keeps going.
Okay.
I think you see the reference 176.
Okay.
Yep.
got it. And if we go to the next one. Okay, this was no changes, so, and one more. Now, this is where it gets into more detail. But if I continue with this approach, which I'll do, I'll need the committee our subcommittee to really look at the detail to make sure that my words reflect the change, okay? Because when you're not typing the whole thing, it forces you into using language to kind of fill in why it's happening or where the change is.
Do we still want to call 19 preliminary consent, or I guess you're using the old name there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be preliminary review at this point.
Maybe what I can do is show that, cross it out, and write preliminary,
That's a biggie.
yeah,
Big
Yeah, I
change.
think that's
Yes.
semantic
Yeah.
change that's included.
yes.
Drop the
Good
consent.
catch, yeah. Now, the question is, I think maybe there's one, no, yeah, this is where I ran out of time. When we get to 4, where we are adding whole new, in a sense, sections, like lighting. I mean, lighting was mentioned before, but not to this degree. Is the preference to show the full text of it, or to try to do a high-level summary of what is said in it?
I think for the PowerPoint, it's a high-level summary, because they'll also have access to this.
Yes.
And we can go to that.
And I thought one of the stations
Will be,
would be that type,
Okay.
and some of those topics, because those are like the big things we're changing. And I thought we'd want to focus like the stations on the big
Okay.
things we're changing. So that was my thought. If you guys have other ideas, please let me know.
And are we referring to them?
why isn't it saying? Okay.
Sometimes it just needs a minute.
I think my mask is too thick today. Are we referring to them as additions, changes, improvements?
That's up to you guys. I mean, how
I've
do you
been
want to?
referring to them as additions. And I think, improvement is a value statement that... Clearly, there's a little... We're here to get feedback on.
Addition
on
is the most,
addition,
is the most
yeah.
appropriate, yeah. I think addition, I don't know, has a, that we're trying to do more, and we are trying to improve. I think it just sounds better than changes.
You've got changes in the first 2 lines up here.
no changes currently proposed, no changes currently
Yeah.
proposed, so.
Well, right, well, in this section.
Well, and I guess it should
changes.
say no changes or additions currently proposed, but yeah, I think they'll know it's a.
If it's an additional section, though.
Section 19, preliminary review, there's 3 bullets there. Are you saying that that's just a placeholder, or that's what you're proposing? Because those are, if there's 3 bullets to say what changed in there, in my mind, it would be that the reviews have been at the, or more on, instead of approving at preliminary, is reviewing and providing guidance by the planning commission. And then another bullet is the mayor and city council are now involved earlier.
Yeah.
So those, in my mind, are the big changes in that section. You're right, those are changes, but they're almost like footnotes to some of the other changes that went on. And then the other big change is that instead of the 23 or however many criteria, it's using standards and guidelines that have been reformatted in Article 4. If we're just trying to say in 3 bullets what happened in Article,
Yeah.
in that section 19, this preliminary review, those are the 3 big things I think that happened there.
I think that's a good point. And I will enter that.
I'm a little confused by one thing. With Article 2, that no changes? I thought there were,
Maybe it's no substantive, there's changes in
Yeah, 'cause there's-
all of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Changing from building official to city
Yeah.
planner doesn't.
The version I was working from actually didn't have anything underlined. so-
okay, gotcha.
But I will go back and. Yeah, 19, we really need to cover more clearly the change in process. Okay.
And maybe, you know what, I know it's a silly thing, but maybe take the parentheses away from review, just to show that we are changing it, clearly changing it out
Capitalize it
from,
and say review, yeah.
yeah,
Uh-huh,
just
yeah.
make it,
Yeah,
you know, what it formerly was crossed
Yeah.
out, and the new one, to show that it is review, because that should be amenable
yeah,
to everyone,
okay.
and be seen as an improvement.
And this will make it easier if we're going with kind of bullets as opposed to providing all of the detail, because they'll have a copy like this in front of them. So for section 4, the feedback I'm hearing is that it would be good to do this at a high level and not reproduce the detailed changes. Okay, so I think in section 4, the first thing that we'd cover is the change in kind of formatting where you have intent, standards, and guidelines. And do we anywhere ever define the difference between a standard and a guideline?
Not in the ordinance itself, but what we did do quite a bit in the initial discussions where the one had shall and the other was should. That was one of the things. And one was measurable, whereas the other tended not to be measurable. I think one of our early presentations, there was a breakdown of like what's a standard and what's a guideline.
Yeah.
I could send that to you.
That would be good.
Well, and I think, didn't we also look at putting the
Guidelines in a policy and not in the ordinance, so then we can easily change them in and out as new guidelines become appropriate? I thought we had talked about that, or did that get changed?
We did, but they seem to be in here, so.
Yeah, I think we talked about it, having it as a separate document, but then still they're referenced in there in the ordinance itself, but that the visuals and other things could be in a separate document.
would it be cleaner, and I'm just going to ask Glenn, just to reference there's a guideline policy, and to take them all out of the code and put them in a separate policy? So,
I was kind of squishy about that, only because if there are things in the guidelines that you actually want to have the force of law, just referencing them and being able to change them without, the planning commission or the city council taking action, it's hard to actually give them the force of law. So if you reference, for example, the guidelines adopted on January 3rd, 2022, then those can be given the force of law. But if it's a living document that's changing over time, just referencing it in the code, they truly are then just guidelines that a developer will not have to adhere to. So if it's something that you want to be able to say, the planning commission can make a decision on this, this is something that can lead toward an approval or a denial, I really think those things need codified. If it's truly just guidelines, things that we're hoping developers will do within the city, then I think it can be a stand-alone document. I just think you have to be careful about what you, because there'll be things in the guidelines where you'll think that's actually really important, and this stuff really not as important. The stuff that's really important really should be in the code.
I always viewed the guidelines as the potential conditions on an application. So your standards are your code requirements, and then the guidelines are, this guideline needs to be a condition to this application. Because then if they turn that guideline into a condition, then it has the force of law because they've made it a condition.
But that's more of a tool. That's more of a tool then for the planning commission, right? Do we really need to even reference it? I mean, we could say in the code there's a reference. There's a reference set of guidelines the planning commission will be using to, evaluate your application and potentially attach conditions. You, Mr. Developer, should familiarize yourself with this and perhaps incorporate these into your plans.
I think there are qualitative considerations that the planning commission does and should, and in the future should continue to consider. And I wonder if for applicants and for the public, almost having them in the code, the guidelines there, doesn't make it more transparent what really is going to be considered. Because I think there's a tendency for people to just go to the measurable and say, I meant those three things. And if there are a kind of general policy things that could change that we want to communicate, maybe we can still have a policy document that it's almost like there's kind of qualitative, hard, and broad vision of the city, that we want you to, that helps you understand why we have these.
And then the master plan.
Yeah, exactly.
22 items that got taken out of Article 1 or 3, I can't remember which.
Yeah.
Do they show up generally in guidelines?
No, some are standard. We tried to really make them more measurable where we could. So some became standards that had more refinement to, or more specificity. And then some are guidelines because they're just qualitative, as was discussed. But I did think that we had talked earlier about if they were in another document, we could add illustrations and scenarios, like here's some examples. I still think that's possible, and because it's hard to do that in an ordinance and write all that out. But we could have the guidelines listed with whatever it is that we're talking about, but then and we don't have to have it for the hearing, but have it as, here's examples of this guideline in action, and take some photographs or provide examples of how it might work in Lewis, because it's not a standard, it's hard to measure, but you do want to be clear on what you're looking for.
Yes, and I also want to make sure that the ordinance is clear that these are guidelines, and that the guidelines may not always apply to every single application.
Yeah.
Because I can see the public thinking, well, it's in the code, they have to do it. Well, they're actually guidelines, and they may not be appropriate for that
We
application.
need a paragraph of explanation so they don't seize upon the guidelines as
I agree that.
as law.
Yeah.
Probably also say that to the extent the planning commission wants to have
These guidelines, imposed upon a particular application, they should specifically say so in the resolution granting preliminary consent or preliminary.
As a condition of the preliminary review.
Right.
And where will we put this in the code somewhere, and if so, where?
That's a good one.
Because wherever we put it, I'm still concerned that of the 22, the first one doesn't appear anywhere, and it seemed at our last meeting there was a feeling that, well, maybe we don't really need it, but,
How about definitions? Define a guideline. I
Yeah.
mean, just,
Or the purpose.
Yeah.
yeah.
The purpose of the ordinance is, because I think we've kind of changed, we've added to the purpose of the ordinance is to provide more specific standards, and then some guidelines that the commission and council may choose to adopt if appropriate for that application.
Well, I mean, wouldn't you just put the guidelines in Article 4? I mean, I'd almost retitle Article 4, Improvement Specifications and Design Standards and Guidelines for Major Subdivisions, or something like that, then have
Yeah.
a section that, here are the guidelines, toward the back of the standards section, and here's guidelines, after you've gone through all the standards,
but
maybe.
won't the guidelines appear under each topical area after the standard for that area, as opposed to guidelines at the very, like,
Yeah,
That's
how it works now.
probably the better, yeah, I mean, you want to be able to find it in the area.
I think
that-
that's
yeah.
more user-friendly in a sense, yeah.
And just so I'm clear, because we've decided to reference like BPW standard specifications and details, that's okay, right? Because the idea is we didn't want to have all of that incorporated into the subdivision code, we just wanted to refer
Right.
to a
No,
separate
that-
document.
Yep, that's okay, design standards. Specs.
It is, I know in some ordinances, they refer to the conservation districts' specifications and
Yeah,
standards, which are
yeah,
different.
yeah.
And there's been some court cases about that. They've been upheld, but it is I think it's important to have that and explain it and just reference it where it's needed instead of trying to put 30 pages of specifications into an ordinance.
Yeah.
But you do have to be clear, and there were some standards about making sure that the reference is clear and it's accessible, and, that document anybody can get to it and use it.
So I see that very similar, like you said, the conservation district or the DELDOT standards, because we don't put DELDOT's
Right.
code into our ordinance, we reference it. So if we do that,
And we always say most current edition,
yeah.
so it's
Because
like.
I think of BBW as one of the reviewing agencies they have to get approval from before they can get final approval.
One thing that's come up in my last round of reviews is the requirements for the as-built documents, and that they're so more detailed than they were before, that I'm thinking that should be a separate referred to document. For the biggest reason is it may change over time. So we can talk about that when I get you what I have, but just keep that in mind.
I am concerned that the 22 are not all captured somewhere. And I'm just wondering if we should either leave the 22 in up front with the understanding that some of them may be repeated in greater detail under a certain area, or, I mean, as I read through these, I can't think of any that I would want to eliminate. And so if they're not all captured, then I feel that we are eliminating something.
I agree with you, Nancy. I don't think there's any harm in including that and having it clearly on one page that, people still need to be mindful of these.
I just want to be sure that they are, I think Tom and Janelle have worked to refine them and put some more meat on the bones in certain instances. We had training from Max Walton, if you'll remember, where Max specifically said, if these are the way they are, left the way they are, and you approve or deny an application based upon them, he had basically said, I'll not be able to defend that. And this has played itself full circle now, because in the Fisher's Cove litigation, the Fisher's Cove attorneys have sent Max a letter saying, putting him on notice that he may be a witness for his expert guidance that he gave you. And then the Planning Commission basically, in their view, ignoring it and relying upon these certain, whichever one's in the 22, to deny the application. So I just want to be sure that in this version of the subdivision code, to the extent they're left in there in some fashion, we should heed Max's advice and try to quantify them so they're not as amorphous as some of them currently are.
Can we explain, or
Nancy, which one is, or ones are not missing? You said number 1 is not,
I don't see number 1 anywhere, and it seems like it's,
so that's complying with zoning and other
Yeah,
applicable provisions?
when the planning commission is conducting their review, they're not just considering everything in a 170, they're also considering compliance with
I think that's in there
197.
somewhere, just let me try and find that
I
one.
think we moved that around, and that's also part of the staff review.
And we
if I
also said
remember.
that we should refer to it in the purpose of the subdivision ordinance was to implement zoning, which I did elaborate further on.
I found it in I think I did a search on it, okay, and I think I found it in the staff review, but it wasn't clear to me that we were making it clear that the planning commission would review it, because I'm afraid someone can say, well, I went through a staff review and nothing happened, why the planning commission doesn't have a right to.
Well, the staff review is specifically to review it for compliance with zoning and to report to the planning commission, is this proposed subdivision in compliance with zoning? So that's, unless all the planning commission members are going, I mean, they're going to interpret it, but the staff, as part of their review, and they generally do, is include a paragraph of, is this use compliant with setbacks and other parts that are in the zoning ordinance, and reporting to the planning commission.
And typically, if something doesn't comply with, like, lots don't comply with lot size, you're not going to see it because staff's not going to allow it to get to you before that gets addressed. I mean, there might be, like, some minor things, like,
I guess I'm thinking of belt and suspenders here. So if by chance something gets missed in the staff review, and the planning commission feels that, believes that in their estimation, it could be some gray area, I don't know, where this hasn't been met, I sense that we're removing that from the ability of the planning commission to do that.
I don't think we,
Are we, or
that was never, I don't think, the
think it was the
intent.
intention.
And I
don't think it was the
thought,
intention, yeah.
No, and it's, I mean, it does talk in Article 4 about Chapter 170 zoning or the building code. So it's whatever is in there covers, takes precedence over these subdivision regulations. But I mean, we should make it clear if it's not clear. I thought because I had looked at number 1 too, and how do we replicate that in this? Let me just spend some time looking at it.
If you could look at that, that would be great.
So that was the first thing, is that we don't want to lose that one. Was there something else about the other 22?
Is number 13 effect on area property values? Because I know that's a hot button for the public.
I couldn't find it, but
Yeah, and there's, from a financial standpoint, the applicant it doesn't talk about property values, it talks about improvements in the, what are the costs to the city, things like that, they have to provide that, but there isn't a breakdown. They do ask for the property value assessment before and after.
But I understand this to mean the effect on not just the value of the property that might be developed, but the effect it has on surrounding properties or on property values in general in the community.
Glenn, has there been case law about the validity of that one? Because I know in many different places I've worked, it's good, it's not good, so,
It's a crystal ball type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, the general law in that area is a zoning district sets out what you can do, what lot sizes are, what types of construction you can do, and if you can comply with those things, I mean, it's for the city forefathers to make sure they construct zoning laws such that property values won't be affected. So that's one of the ones that does give me a little bit of, because the zoning code says I can do it, so, because the zoning code or the subdivision code has not kept up with maybe the values and the way that people have renovated and reconstructed homes in the area, that's not this buyer's fault. It's more a subject of or a function of city council not keeping up with what's going on within the city. So I think you could keep it in some form of a consideration. we should think it through. But it's one of those ones that I would certainly, if the planning commission was going to hang its hat on a denial based upon the effect on surrounding property values, I'd be.
Yeah, and my brain's also thinking like, ooh, how does that compare with the comp plans and how do we get more affordable workforce housing into the city? And then people coming and saying it's decreasing my property value work. And I mean, it probably isn't, but is that something we should, I think it's something this subcommittee needs to consider, and is that something that needs to be in the code? Is it appropriate for the code?
Yeah.
I guess I would say it differently, sort of along the lines of, the incorporation of, subdivision features that harmonize with surrounding properties so as not to affect values, or something like that, where you're saying,
Right.
you gotta, step it up here. You gotta, sort of incorporate amenities and do those things that, so I would revise it a little bit, but still, I mean, that's still looking out for surrounding property values, but you're not just saying, if you devalue properties near you, we're going to deny you. I think you have to say, incorporate those sorts of things that are in harmony with
To me,
the character of the neighborhood.
I'm surprised that we haven't, well, I guess we haven't denied too many applications, but I'm surprised it hasn't gone into, a legal case before, just like that. I mean, it's one thing to put it in as a condition and the developer accepts it, but if you use it as a condition for denying an application, that's
Right.
very hard to defend, I would think. And there's a few things like that in those 22.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, the one that I see here that I have trouble understanding whether it should be there or should remain there is job creation. Because I don't really understand what that means. Is it, we're going to hire 4 men for people to perform this work, so that's job creation?
I've always struggled with that one as well. I mean, any new subdivision that's going to build new homes is going to create jobs for some period of time. Yeah, so I'm not sure what the intent was of.
Yeah, that one kind of pops in, and I think maybe it was like, originally it made sense. I'm not so sure in this day and age that it makes sense anymore. And I know we discussed it at our last meeting. We had the same, it's like, why is it here? Because, I mean, everybody can say, well, you're building houses, you're not building jobs. But technically, you're building jobs by building the houses, and it's...
I've seen it in like economic development cases where, commercial industrial park facility or something like that, where the state's going to give a lot of money for the project, it's got to have a certain number of jobs. But this is a little different.
In my neighborhood, Piletown Village, we have 2 houses being renovated, existing houses that have been there 20 years. Within a block of me, 2 houses are under work, being renovated. And any day of the week, like today, we have lawn care, but just guys are running up and down the street with their pickup trucks and telling, there's lots of jobs out there.
I had originally looked at something that other communities use called a fiscal impact assessment. And it does look at the impact of that development on things like jobs, but also demands on services and things for the city. But it all started at like 100 homes and up. So anything below that, the idea is there'd be some impacts, but not enough to measure and really make demands on it. So that I didn't include it in here because I didn't see too many developments at that scale coming to a place like Lewis that they are going to look and require. It was a pretty detailed study to determine how many new police officers or how many new code officials or whatever the city, the impacts on that and the school district and other things. They are out there, but it's generally for larger developments that need to have that scrutiny during the review process.
To follow up on that, Tom, if there is an annexation that could result in something, like a lot of development, if it's going to occur, would probably need to be through annexation through the city. Those are all criteria council is taking into consideration on whether or not to even accept the annexation. So I think the job creation part is actually, if we're looking at it from like a large subdivision, which is only in this city going to happen, like 100 plus, is only going to happen through an annexation. That's actually being considered through the annexation process. So, you know, what do you guys think about it? I think we're covered, but if, you know,
I guess what I'm getting at, what I'd like to get to is a crosswalk from these 22. Yeah, and I'm thinking, you know, I'm picturing an Excel spreadsheet where the 22 are listed, and on the right it says, where in the new code is this covered? And for job creation, I would think instead of saying where in the new code it's covered, we say
it's covered in the annexation
covered
process.
in annexation, you know,
I like that.
NA here or whatever.
And Tom, I'm thinking, and Nancy, I was just going back and thinking, maybe in the preliminary review in 17019, we make sure that it's in compliance with the zoning code. So it's not just the planning commission, it's the city as a whole, which includes the planning commission and mayor and council, is making sure it's in compliance with the code. Does that make sense for everybody? Because that's just part of the preliminary review process.
Yeah.
Because I was just going through and I'm like, oh, that seems to, because we seem to be covering a bunch of other items there, so I think it covers it there. Oh, and I'm going to jump topics, Nancy, if you don't mind. I was thinking for the workshop, explaining what happened to the 22, just one station going,
Yeah.
this is where they went.
Okay.
We didn't get rid of them. We moved them and bulked them up for the most part. Does that work?
I think that works, yeah.
Okay.
What other people? Yeah.
Does that make sense for everyone?
Yes, it
And
does.
Because I think the public thinks of these 22, and,
Yes.
you know,
And I think what we did was,
okay.
as the subcommittee, you guys have given them more weight and more explanation as to how they comply.
So I didn't see anything else on the 22 that kind of concerned me for Joe, Deborah, any issues with it? Okay.
So if we add in the statement, the elaboration of 17019, that zone is covered and other ordinances, and then do a spreadsheet that has that in case, you know, at the meeting, or if someone asks us, we'll say, here's our evaluation, this is what the subcommittee looked at, and here's where they're at, where they're covered at.
And, you know, if we're asked what's our rationale for getting rid of the 20, in a sense, shifting the 22 to standards, I think the rationale is it makes it, I mean, I don't know whether we can say this, it makes it more legally defensible. But I think the most important thing is it makes it clear to an applicant what we are really looking for under each of those, how they meet it. And how they meet it in many ways can be measurable things that would be under the standards, or how they meet it could be qualitative things that would be under the guidelines, but both would be relevant.
More transparent for everybody.
Yes.
And how could we include like a statement like Glenn was saying about the property values?
Yeah.
What section could that go in? Because that does make a lot of sense.
So if I understood Glenn correctly, the zoning
And it always will be on a topic.
and the comprehensive plan are all built around maintaining neighborhood integrity and setting the zones to maintain the values of different areas of the
But
city.
it seems like the maintaining neighborhood integrity is one that we are not able to enforce.
Well, we do have in lot, I mean, the whole idea of the standards for lot configurations and site suitability is to make infill development consistent with what's already there. And all of those standards, in one way or another, lead up to making sure that if someone's building on a lot that's in a neighborhood, it's consistent with what's around it. It doesn't come into that, you know, it's not a statement that you could put it in as a guideline, I think, in that same section.
Yeah, I mean, right, you've got it in section 170-26, then subsection A of that is site design, subsection, then there's lot configuration underneath that, which has standard and guides, then there is structures and improvements that has standards and guidelines, and in the standards, it has Buildings and structures shall have a mix of styles, facades, roof pitches, and color for all subdivisions. So that's one of them. And it says placement of buildings shall consider the existing context of the surrounding area. New and infill residential development shall respect privacy and solar access through appropriate siting of structures. Then guidelines say buildings and structures, architectural style, and site improvements should be designed to reflect Lewis's historical and marine community. So I think someplace in there you could work it in. I don't know if you need to say, to reflect property values in the area, but at least you at least I think want to say, of similar character to
The
the surrounding.
intent does say that. It doesn't say value. It says, as Janelle pointed out, the intent for that whole section is ensure that the arrangement of lots and structures is consistent with development patterns existing or planned, and that the proposed buildings and site improvements employ context-sensitive designs that help protect neighborhood character and maintain core values as stated in the comprehensive plan. You could
add property values.
insert property values
Yeah.
into that.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to put it. I mean, my mind always tries to go to, kind of an outlier of event that could.
Yes.
Worst case scenario.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yes, and what could be problematic, that's
If
why we're
someone
here.
was building something that met all of the zoning requirements, and let's say it's a commercial, area zone commercial, and structure, design, setbacks, everything's being met, but the business that's going to operate there is a tannery. I don't know whether anyone's ever here next to a tannery. But I believe urine is used heavily in tanning, something that smells like that at least is. And the surrounding properties say this will greatly decrease our property value.
Right.
But everything else about that building and what's being done
Right, it's compliant.
is compliant.
Yeah.
We could have that more realistically we had it with oyster shells here, and, we could have it with something, we're involved in the, in
Yeah.
the industries of the sea, I think.
I think it comes back down to whether it's defensible or not if you deny an application based on it's a tannery or an oyster processing plant, and it meets all the other requirements. That's just based on some sort of relatively qualitative statement in the intent section. That's what I've always had heartburn about with those 22 items.
So in that situation, if we do think that type of building and business would devalue surrounding properties, what do we have in here that would enable the planning commission to?
You have input from the neighbors, for one.
Yeah.
You hear from them, yes.
But
It shouldn't be, it should be in a zone to start off
Yeah.
with, that is allowing industrial operations, not in a residential zone.
Except that we have that right now.
You have that right now, right?
I don't know if you're familiar, there's the old,
Right in my neighborhood.
right, right,
Like that.
yeah, was zoned.
And it's zoned industrial, it's, zoning requires every use, every reasonable use to be accommodated somewhere. That's, the state laws will say that. So you have to figure out where's it going to go, and the city's picked a couple areas for industrial, and there can be impacts to the adjacent residential areas, but it's, I think, still given, if you have to apply or allow for it somewhere in the city, where's the best places? So then you're dealing with, have you picked an area that there could be enough screening to deal with it for noise? Odor is hard because odor travels further, and
Everybody's nose is different. So I'm just thinking, I actually, 2 houses down is the industrial area where I live. I knew that going in, it didn't bother me. I'm just trying to think, and it hasn't impacted my property, especially right now, it hasn't impacted my property value. My property value is going up. So it's had no negative impact. But I think as everybody's going to look at it differently, and I think we'll work with Glenn, and you can help us provide some context as the best way to resolve, because you came up with I can't think, incorporate values, and I think maybe that we do something like that in there, and if you can give us some wording so we can kind of get in there, but I think what we don't want to do is go, I think, and as if you said, I think there's concern, it's like, oh, we're going to deny this because of one item, and it's property values, and I've had cases go, well, one appraiser goes, it won't, one appraiser goes, it will, and it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, I think it's a combination of factors.
Yeah.
But that's just
Yeah.
my thoughts. Do
I
you
mean, the
think,
doomsday scenario that Nancy raised,
Yes.
that's a tough, I mean, those sorts of uses, typically you like to see them approved as conditional uses or something, so there's one more look at it, and you can attach conditions to look out for the neighbors, but that's a zoning issue, again, still.
yeah.
Just so I'm clear on the topic we were on right before this one was conditions. So my understanding is we would include something in the start of the standards there and say what's a standard, what's a condition, just briefly, but also leave them in there, guidelines in there, but then have it as a policy document. We're pulling them out and we're going to elaborate on guidelines, where they should be used or have opportunities for using them.
And the examples you were talking about for the
Right.
diagrams could be in that.
But the ordinance, they're going to stay in here.
Yes, and we're
be
gonna-
referenced, and
Yeah.
but we'll have another
Yeah.
document that,
And
so.
I thought we were still going with standards,
Intent, standards, and
sorry,
guidelines.
intent, standards, and guidelines, and conditions are what the LPC can put on something. Because it can be any of those, in a sense. Okay, yep. Okay, so Tom, you're going to do the crosswalk, is that?
I'll do a spreadsheet
That's
and say
great,
where they're
okay.
at.
Anything else on this before we get to looking at going to Article 4? And maybe before we go to Article 4, is there anything in this new version, Tom, is there anything in particular you think we need to look at before we head to 4?
No, it's just the one comment, I put it in my email. I incorporated some of the zoning definitions into it that typically you have them in subdivision as well, like what's a lot?
Yeah,
And there was some discussion about pervious and impervious, which it wasn't in here, and I don't know how current, I pulled out the zoning one and put it into here, and it has a little diagram.
The city, as part of a different ordinance, is working on pervious and impervious.
Okay.
So I think once those get worked out, we'll just
We'll
have to.
update this?
Yep,
yeah.
Okay. But
just a heads up.
Because I think people are interested to know, I mean, the big issue is is crushed stone pervious or impervious,
Right.
and depending upon its application and blah, 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 yeah.
and we might need to expand on that in here, but it is good if we're talking about it, and it's talked about in some of the guidelines, so they have a clearer picture. And also in there is streets that are broken down, and I know, Charlie, you finalized the street standards. And I know that, I'm not sure if I'm looking at page 9 right now. Are these still the same breakdowns that are in streets?
Oh, they are, yeah.
Okay, so I just
Yep.
wanted to make clear in my mind that
Yeah,
it's the same.
I tried to make sure that stayed the same.
Okay,
I did add some definitions, like I said. I did told Tom beforehand, I made significant revisions to 170-24 and 23 and 24, conditional and final acceptance at the end of the construction process. So to reflect the way it actually goes, it's different from what was in the old code. So at some point, we'll have to go through those. Yeah, and I haven't even shared those with Tom yet.
Okay.
the only other section I'd mention is open space. So open space has a definition from the open space standards, which was the definition that the annexation subcommittee looked at. I did mention, I think in my email, there's a term there for open areas, which is in our current ordinance, and it's slightly different. an open area doesn't have to meet all the criteria for open space, but it could be something small where you're just leaving a space open between a road
It's part of
and a
the right of
property
way.
area.
Yeah.
So it's just
Yeah.
something that's required, but it doesn't need to meet all the requirements for open space. So I left that in there because it seems like it's typically used.
Yeah.
And then there was a definition from the zoning ordinance, open space permanent, that, actually, no, this was from, okay.
This is more just a formatting question. Under streets, we have street and a definition of street, and then street residential, urban, street secondary come under it. But for open space, we have open space community, open space permanent, open space usable, as each is separate. I don't know whether there's any,
We could make them
it's
consistent.
just, yep, yeah, okay. Okay, anything else before we head to 4, Tom, that we should be highlighting?
No.
Well, let's head to 4. What page are we on for when we begin Article 4? 43. Now, has everyone had a chance to look through, and do we have, we can either have Tom describe things as we go through each section, or we can just call out a section and get comments, if there are any.
I think we can go either way.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, anything on 170-26, lot configurations? Oh, site design first.
I'll just change that intent statement as we just talked about.
Right.
And we're going to add guidelines, right, to the top, to the title? Design standards and guidelines for major subdivision,
Oh, that's right.
right?
Will do.
Or did I miss that?
No, you're right, I think.
Okay.
Aren't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, anything on lot configurations? On structures and site improvements? I noticed that you were changing, in some places, changing structures to buildings. And in other places, doing buildings and structures, and I wasn't sure what the thinking was behind that. I mean, I couldn't form an opinion on what, you know.
Well, in the definitions, that's where it started. There wasn't a definition for building, there was only structure. And then I saw in zoning, there was a definition for building and structures, and I think it comes back to H Park. What are they reviewing? Is this a structure, is this a building? And there are differences in some cases, so I added both definitions in. And then when I went to here, it was talking about structures, which there may be some confusion if it's a building or a structure. A structure may be not a habitable, it could be just
A
something.
fence.
A fence, yeah.
Yeah.
So under the standards, I'm on page 45 now, 2A2, placement, and it's just placement of buildings. And I would have thought you'd also want the placement of structures to consider the existing
Structures, yeah.
context of the surrounding area.
So I changed it in 2A1 to buildings and structures. I didn't change it in the title of that.
I'm on 2A2,
2A2.
where you got rid of structures and just put buildings.
Okay,
And I was thinking that you'd want that to be buildings and structures.
okay.
Unless I'm, I may be missing something, that's why I'm raising it.
I'm just trying to think, because typically what you're going to be looking at is typically for a subdivision is the setbacks and the buildable area for the house. Because you're not looking at the accessory structures, the swimming pools, and the fences. So does it make more sense to be a building? Because again, those are just things that are just permitted in zoning. So I'm just trying to think out loud. I mean, it can go either way, but.
I don't know what all falls under structures, but if in the layout of a subdivision, the tennis court is going to back onto the contemplation garden of something, you know.
The Zen garden.
Maybe
That's a
it should be, it should be in a different area, so, you know, yeah. Because a tennis court would be a structure, right?
Yes.
I don't know, okay.
H Park was considering a building on a beach that has a carport, which is not really a building, it's sort of more of a structure, but it was attached to a building, and where does the property line fall and setbacks start if you have a carport? So,
Would it be okay to just put both to
Yeah, I
cover our
think both,
bases,
yeah.
so buildings and structures?
Yeah.
And make sure that we have the definitions for both clearly in both places, right?
And then on guidelines, 2B2, that's another place where it's just
Right there, too.
buildings. Yeah, I'd do both there, too, yeah. Okay, anything else? Did anyone have anything else on structure and site improvements? Site suitability, page 47. Okay, on to our favorite topic, page 48, lighting requirements.
new and improved.
We spent a meeting on that. I spent about a day reviewing the meeting for all the details, and another half a day folding things in. So I was amazed that this is the topic that it was really generated a lot of interest in how to make it fit right. But as I said, when I brought it to you, I put everything in that was based on model ordinances, so I'm glad we spent time on it.
Yeah, I'm glad we did, too, because I think it's really helped us.
And it's also something that's evolved a lot. A lot more than construction even.
Yeah.
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 So I'm glad that it's, I think,
The things I got
will change again probably, but
from the references that Anne Marie's friend sent us is that in Lewis, the big concerns are not only the brightness of light, but where it's at. So if you're at the beach and you're on the surf, it's a habitat, turtles and things, they get disoriented by light
right.
that's at the beach. It doesn't matter what color it is or high, they're used to heading back into the water, they're going in the wrong direction. And that's why it was important there is where possible to keep lights low or below a dune so you're protecting that habitat area.
Because didn't we make sure, because I know you reached out to the person from DENREC to make sure we could add that condition as it's a guideline about habitats and lighting their
Right, because it's
habitats.
not all areas, it's certain.
Yeah.
And the other ones, the marshes, and even in the annexation areas, the concern there is that if it's too bright, predators, owls can feed more all night long, and you want to have areas that are dark enough that are good for, marsh is a good habitat area.
That the prey can survive for another day to then there's more prey for the predators in the long run. Keep the balance of nature.
Just out of interest, I don't know whether anyone knows the answer to this. Does the city get many complaints about light intrusion on properties from surrounding properties? I mean, people pointing a light at your...
I think if it's really obnoxious and really strong, but I don't get too many. I don't think the building code gets that many.
I remember when the school was being talked about as the lights from the fields
Yeah.
on the adjacent residential.
Yeah.
It was,
Right.
that was a big concern. If we put those lights up,
Yeah, and
what will happen?
then they're actually making them low to the ground, so they're not up high, they're lower. And I think that's where the downward and screened and shielded, is very helpful.
My only concern is I think it's great that we're going to add for the dunes, but again, we have it in our language is not strong on that. On 3C1, we have it as, just had it here. Joe, help me out. This is exactly what you hate, this kind of wording.
Special consideration should be
page are you
given.
on, first of all?
50,
Page 50.
at the bottom.
Okay.
Avoid,
Oh, 3 Street 1, okay.
avoid the installation.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we want to avoid. Yeah, we want to avoid, and what is the other one? Instead of should, we shall.
Yeah, you want shall.
We want shall over should. What do we
Well,
want?
this is a guideline.
Yeah.
So the difference
So-
here is if it were standard, you'd say shall.
Yes.
You're suggesting there should be a standard, is what I think you're
perhaps
saying,
that's
Deborah.
So, and I think, again, this is a guideline, but I think if it becomes a condition, the commission and our council can go, you shall not do that. If this is something, again, is a guideline that if you want, you can make it stronger if you adopt it as a condition of approval. I think that's the purpose of all the guidelines is they're guidelines and you can make them stronger if you so choose based on the application. I think that's why we have some flexibility in those. Just because, again, not every site is exactly the same, so maybe it is, avoid this, or you don't use the LED lights here, use something else here.
Particularly this comes up, on bayfront properties, which are the highest value properties, and
if they have beach access, they're eliminating the steps
Yeah.
leading down to the beach.
And, I know of other communities
Yeah.
that prohibit lighting in Florida where I go, because there's a lot of nesting turtle activity, and it's prohibited to light up over the dunes. So just throwing that out there, I do think it's,
I think people just use flashlights when they're going down the steps, you know what I mean? I mean, there are,
Or you can use those very low to the ground solar
That's
lights
right.
or something just to mark the pathway, which
Motion
is,
detectors, which turn on and turn off as you leave. yeah.
the foxes too.
I hadn't caught this earlier, but under C, on page 51, under C2, we have a bunch of shells there, but this is down as a guideline.
C2.
You're right.
yep.
So
That be
change that to
standard?
should.
Well, or if we think shall is the correct thing, then it should be up in standard, so it's like one or the other, I'd say.
So this
Let's see.
came here because I think one of the parameters for a guideline was it's not in all areas. So this, if you recall, I sent a map
Yeah.
with this. So it's certain areas in the city this would apply to. And it depends on how close they are to those areas as well.
And I think it also depends on what's in that exact area. There's a lot of,
I mean, to me,
I want to say
There's-
nebulous about this, but that's why it's there, and I think that's where you have that ability to make it stronger as a condition.
Perhaps we should, because the reality is the places that are most likely to be addressed in larger subdivisions are adjacent to marshy areas.
And I think the intent was, and Tom can back me up, is that not all marshy areas are the same and don't have all the same wildlife habitat.
Yeah.
So, maybe lighting is okay, to a certain degree is okay here, and you definitely want to restrict it more over here. I think that's why it ended up in the guideline. And I think, again, if we change the shall to the should, and then if you guys so choose as you're reviewing an application, you can make that more specific. It's just an idea to throw out there.
So this one is really,
Yeah.
there are guidelines
Yeah.
where you can do shall or should, or you provide a list of things to do. And that's what this one does. It provides two options, A or B. One is, don't have any light, 0 luminaires showing on that area. Or you're doing a mitigation study, and that gets back to what Janelle's talking about, but that's a sensitive habitat area. It depends on what species are there that are sensitive. And usually those plans, when you look at them, it talks about ways to mitigate it. So certain species are more sensitive to yellow lights than red light or different things. So they could come up if they're looking at it, they're doing a plan, and they're saying, okay, let's say it was off New Road, right next to the marsh, and they've determined that the species of greatest sensitivity here are certain types of nymphs that they're not going to disturb it, but in terms of lighting, they've done based on studies, they say that these types of lights are less disruptive to them, so that's how they're mitigating it. So in this guideline, it's either, A, you don't shine any light on it, that's easy, not easy, but you don't have to do the study, or B, you're doing the study, so shall might be appropriate.
I think, I mean, this is why I actually think this probably should be a standard, is, first of all, it refers just to a very specific limited set. So I think a lot of guidelines, Janelle, are things where it may not apply to blah, 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 but here we're defining where it applies. And so as devil's advocate, I'd say, is there ever a situation where building is occurring in the Delaware ecological network where we wouldn't want to have either A or B done? And if the answer to that question is no, then I think it should be a standard. If
That's perfectly fine.
If it's yes, there are, then maybe it should be a...
So we could theoretically move section C here to be...
C2, yeah.
Yeah, C1 and 2, I'm thinking.
Well, I'm just trying to think of,
Are we anticipating any major subdivisions on the beach? I'm just trying to think, because that's the only place that would...
Unless Children's Beach House leaves, I mean,
Or the yacht.
that's what it is,
I think maybe
They could,
Absolutely.
Yes,
A whole large block of.
I go back to the area I grew up in, and it's like totally different now, so.
Is it likely? No.
No, it's the mics.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes a minute to actually talk into it.
Is
and
there any downside to moving this into standards?
Just explaining to people that it's not, there's, large parts of this, even Lewis Beach, this wouldn't apply to, but other parts it will. Because one is, are you a major subdivision? But you'll get, people who read this and say, well, I don't, this is a lot more, but if it's just a minor subdivision, it's not going to apply to it. That's the one downside is you're introducing something new that's a change, and you just have to be clear of where it's applied and how it's applied.
Well, see, that's why I see 2 as being
more appropriate as a...
appropriate.
Okay. So
But and I know, Deborah, you had a different view, so what are your thoughts?
Joe, what are your thoughts?
Joe?
Sorry, Nancy.
abstain.
That's fine.
I'm not picking anyway.
My
Either way.
question is that,
Here we go. As a guideline, are these going to be enforceable?
The one thing we said with guidelines at the beginning
Anything can happen.
is they have to show you how there's not an issue with it. So putting it as a guideline, if you're coming in and you're in this area on the map, they have to prove to the city that they're not creating the impacts. Even if it's a should, it's still applying to that development that they may say, here, we've done this management study and we're not creating the impact, but they had to go to that effort, or they had to not put any light onto those areas. So from that sense, it's you would say if they don't do that, you can deny it. If they don't prove to you that there's these impacts, you can deny it. That's different than a standard, though.
I think your question, Glenn can yell at me if I overstep, is that if you make it a condition of approval that you're adopting that guideline,
Right.
it's enforceable by law, because then you have made that a condition of the approval.
Yeah,
So they would have to comply with that condition and that guideline, and you can tweak that guideline from a should to a shall. That is the commission's prerogative and then council's prerogative to make it stronger if you so choose.
But I think the standards are, we think this is going to apply in almost every circumstance where we have a major subdivision. Guidelines are, this may or may not apply, but we don't want to forget about it. So we're putting it in as a guideline, and a developer is going to, if it's applicable to whatever they're proposing, they're going to need to demonstrate that they're adhering to it. And if they're not demonstrating that they're adhering to it, that's when you say, then we're going to make it a condition which has the force of law. You got to demonstrate, you have to comply with it.
So is it okay to have shall under a condition?
Well,
Under a guideline.
Yes, under a guideline.
I mean, I understand why it's kind of clunky that way, because
Right.
you're like, well, we're talking about guidelines, doesn't that feel like should? If you leave it as should, then when you put it in as a condition, you have to remember to say shall, or you can leave.
It seems to me that they should be shall then. Not to belabor a point, which it certainly feels like,
Well,
but.
because I think two is fine as is, because you're doing one or the other, and then the beach one, I don't know. I'm going to admit, I'm a little less concerned about that one, because I just can't in my head think of too many, but understand that it needs to be there as a guideline, and,
In that case, I was thinking that there's places along the bayfront that are behind a dune, and it would be relatively easy if there's exterior lighting to keep it below, versus there's area along the bayfront that there's the parking lot, and then there's houses behind it. And my reading is the distance doesn't matter. If you could see that light source from the beach, it's a problem. It's pretty hard to tell anybody who's behind a city parking lot with big street lights that they can't put lanterns and things up. So that, in my mind, that's where it became not a standard, it's a guideline. That where you can do it and it's relatively easy to do it, whereas where you can't do it.
Well, I think I'd say let's move on then, because we spent a long time on it.
Yeah, I think we're, you convinced me to leave it where it is.
Okay.
The question is, are we changing it to should? Or can we leave a shall in a guideline?
I think we were going to leave the shall in the guideline.
There's a choice.
I like that.
Because there was a choice. And then, again, we'll hear from the public, and if they hate it or love it, we can.
Okay.
Yep. All right, landscaping?
Landscaping we're on to?
Oh, and just as a follow-up, I will be on the November Parks and Rec Commission agenda to give them an update on the landscaping and the open space sections.
And what's the date of that, Janelle?
I knew you were going to ask. The 15th.
Okay. Any comments on landscaping? Okay, on to, where's our next one?
Page 61,
Right.
open space.
Open space.
Open space, 61, there we are. I think we had I have to go back, we have the term green open space, don't we? In definitions, but I don't think we use it here. Or did we remove the green one?
I think it's somewhere in here.
Is it? Okay.
Is it on
It's
page
not in a-
63, guidelines?
But it's not in the definitions.
Okay, so we need to add it as.
Okay, we need to, that's right. I knew, it was either we had it or didn't have the definition, or we had the definition and didn't have it.
All right, so add that.
Made note of,
The
yeah.
definition's in the right-hand column, I just haven't moved it
Yeah.
over there.
Can I ask a question to it? I don't believe it's in the landscaping. I don't think it should, that would be the place. But irrigation systems, again, I think I brought this up. Are we addressing irrigation systems?
I don't think so. I'm not sure, can we address irrigation systems? Because that's really something a private property owner would do on their property. I'm just asking Glenn, because I've never seen that before. And so I'm
I
just
don't
gonna,
think I've seen it before either, but I guess if you had a situation where, it was creating all kinds of runoff and erosion on neighbors' properties and things, maybe there's something that could be done. But that seems like it's that seems like it's something that wouldn't be in the subdivision code. It's something that would be
Environmental condition.
different condition.
applicable to the city, so you're not just hitting the subdivisions, ones that come through. You'd want that to be, I think, citywide.
Holistically.
Yeah.
I asked this specifically because of a situation I have with my own property, that there really is no recourse on sprinkler systems, and we're on a floodplain, and it's saturating the ground in a floodplain, and it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to be where you're going to have a subdivision is where you would have likely, beautiful lawns and an irrigation system, and to be having that in any area that's a floodplain, it's questionable logic from my perspective.
Yeah, for the logic of a lot of the things that we parked from lighting that weren't applicable to major subdivisions, but would be still a concern, we pulled all those out of there, and they're like sitting on the side to go for consideration of environmental conditions. Maybe that falls into that same.
Band-Aids in the parking lot, trying to figure out where in the code does that make the best sense, because if it needs to get reviewed, we definitely need to take a look at it.
It would never, the developer probably wouldn't be involved, so it would have to be part of the covenants, I think, which you do comment on from time to time, so that's fine, but like the developer's going to say, I'm just putting the service to the house. Whatever happens on that yard is on the homeowner.
Right.
It could be part of the covenants, but like I said, I think, like Tom said, it might fall better somewhere else.
I ask this because, the developable land that's left, it's most of it not the highest and driest. And I think that it is relevant because of that. And much of the open space adjacent to the city, or in the city now, is adjacent to the Canary Creek watershed. And is lawn irrigation a good idea?
Right.
So sorry to throw a wild card in there, but, it's not really landscape.
Well, even if you are in a floodplain, you can go 2 or 3 weeks without rain. And then, the guy who has the $1 million house doesn't want to have a dried up lawn in his front yard. So he wants to irrigate. And if it hasn't had rain in 2 or 3 weeks, it's going to soak it up, but you're not going to have any runoff. And these irrigation systems are timed. And it could be, it's on a timer, and it senses the moisture content in the soil, and it's very well engineered these days.
So I think it's definitely an idea that we need to look at. It's got some legs, it sounds like, but it sounds like it fits into maybe the environmental section of the code, or another section of the code that it focus citywide. And I think
I agree.
that to our parking
So
lot.
where can we put that on the park? Can we just put that in the parking lot?
Parking lot keeps getting bigger.
I would like to just ensure that this parking lot that we have, that we're, at the end of this,
Well, actually, can see the list, because I think so often we have, not here in the city of Lewis, but, at times you can have meetings and committees where there's a parking lot, and then no one can find the parking lot afterwards. So I think we really do want to be able to look at that and share that parking lot with the LPC when we report back to them.
Yeah, because there's some great ideas
Yeah,
that are in the parking lot.
Yes, we're going to get a few more parking lot ideas from the public.
yes, I think so too.
Which will be wonderful ideas, but
The other thing with irrigation systems is, do we have anything that requires you, that kind of says that you can't be spraying onto
We have nothing.
adjacent neighbors' property? Because
We have nothing.
I have a friend who, actually had to replace part of their garage because there was so much water from the irrigation system
We will be replacing a fence
coming
because of
on
it.
and fences, yeah.
yeah, so I don't think right now we have anything in the code regarding irrigation, so
There's nothing.
we'll add that to the section
So
of
just in
code,
terms of
to the parking
environmental.
lot, and see how we want to move forward.
I've never seen a case like this, but I wondered if there would be an ongoing trespass, some
Or tort, so you'd have a civil action with your neighbor, that neighbors are like to sue neighbors, but, I mean, that is an ongoing trespass that is damaging your property, so it's a classic tort. So there's a private remedy, I guess, if, to the extent the city isn't.
Yeah.
But it would be better if no one had to get to that, if there actually was, when you call the city, oh, wait a second, no one pulled a permit. So there's not even right now a permitting process, I don't believe, for irrigation systems. In where I was delving, the answer was no, that,
Yeah, I don't really recall coming across an irrigation code in the past.
BBW has an irrigation meter.
Right,
It's basically to save you money,
Yeah.
right, but
because you're not
like
creating
for,
sewage, you're only putting water out.
I think it's the installation of the heads and
Yeah,
where they are, and
yeah.
sometimes it's not you, sometimes you just have to talk into it for a minute or two and then it gets going.
this one's picking up everywhere.
so let's put that in the parking lot, because
I've got it there.
under the present, there's nothing, there's no zoning, there's no guidelines for installation of heads, even for how close those heads can be to a property, to a property line. I actually have heads on my property.
That's a simple issue between
There's an
you
issue,
and
I
your
know there's
neighbor.
an issue.
That
I
was a
have heads
simple
on my
issue. I
property, and
get
also, and they also didn't check before they dug, so they did hit our power lines.
Yeah, you've got some simple issues
It is a
there
classic
going on.
tort, but I know, we don't want to go there.
All right.
Okay.
Great.
But I'll take your
Sorry,
part.
anything else on open space? Page 63, streets? And I would just like to make sure we have had a discussion on why we're making some of the changes to streets, okay? Because I think it will come up at the public meeting.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
There's some
Just so the
big
whole
changes.
committee has a,
I did, remember we had that one issue with like where interconnection to another street or subdivision, what would constitute like too much traffic to allow it? So I put it back on the developer to provide the ADA traffic calculations. I was like, why am I making their problem my problem?
yeah,
Because
exactly.
I learned that from Glenn.
Prove it.
Yeah. So eventually.
That seems very reasonable.
And then in terms of changes to, we are making some changes to widths, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. We're
And the
down to-
rationale there?
So we can get, well, definitely that, but you can also get less width of a road, but parking on one side. And it also depended on the density of the development itself as to how narrow or wide the road would be.
Did we talk
Reduce
about
speeding
the?
too.
Yes.
Yes.
It's actually,
Yeah.
it's a huge safety. Most people don't realize it.
I've dropped this, for residential, I've dropped the design speed in one of the charts from
20,
25
yeah.
to 20, yeah.
Also permitted one-way streets.
Yes. Did we talk about the 20-foot road width and it needing to be 24?
No, we talked about the 24 being 26.
Okay.
The less than 4 units per acre, we're saying that,
I thought we talked about it and I don't remember because,
yeah. We talked about that there wouldn't be the need for on-street parking because there'd be driveways and,
yeah, so the county updated its regulations going from 20 to 24 and I think they made the fire marshal happy and the fire department's happy because unless we start putting up no parking signs which we might want to do.
that's true, yeah.
People will park on both sides of the street and you can't get anything through. But if we're going to have 20-foot wide streets, I'd like a code requirement that says the developer needs to put no parking signs up on the streets.
Possibly paint the curb yellow too.
I can
Yes,
make it another
yes.
note.
Double
if that's,
Double protection.
if everybody's comfortable with the 20-foot wide, I would like some protection because it's just going to be an enforcement issue in the future.
Yeah, let me add that note in there.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's an option. It's not that the developer has to choose that.
But they can go down to that.
Right. If they go down to it, that means that you lose your on-street parking, all loss of on-street parking.
But they might not know it if there's not a sign out there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the people living there, trust me, it happens all the time. People don't realize, and it's like, so they're parking on both sides of the street, and it's like you barely have a drive aisle to get down because, so I would just like to
Okay, I
try
got
to
that.
avoid that
All right,
if possible,
then.
please.
Yeah.
Everybody's okay with that?
Yeah, I like the idea of
Okay.
signs and for, make it yellow.
One big bus stop.
Yeah, because if some people, they think they're far enough from the sign that they can,
Right, and then that also can designate fire lane.
Okay.
Under the heading of having our cake and eating it too, we talked about this, I think, in 3 or 4 meetings of dead-end streets. So in definitions, I put dead-end or no outlet streets, because some of the other definitions did something similar.
I did notice that.
Oh, did we, sorry, Charlie, if I may, did we add something if we have a dead-end street that's to be interconnected, that they require a sign be placed that, so people know there's a road that'll go in the future?
That surely would
Solve some issues?
solve some potential issues. That's a very good idea.
yeah,
The stub street, yeah.
yeah.
If,
And let's not call it a dead end. Let's call it what it is. If it's a stub street, it's a stub street.
does that make sense, Charlie? No, because it's a dead-end street, but it's the intent that it's going to connect through. So if we can warn people that, hey, by the way, this might stop here, but the intent is that there will be another road connecting through. Also, solve some issues in the future for, I didn't know that was going there.
Yeah.
Well, big sign,
Yeah.
can't miss it.
We put it under page 64, standards, number 3A, it talks about stub streets location, and then put the note there about the sign.
Yes. That's it.
Yep, so I'll just say, it's talking about that, but I'll say stub streets require signs saying for future connection.
Okay.
A footnote to Charlie,
Yeah.
back onto no parking on one side.
Yeah.
That's the side of the street that the fire hydrants should be located on.
Oh, good point.
Yeah. You put fire hydrants on the other side, they'll take
Yeah,
up spaces. So
That's a good point.
it should be all on one side.
Anything else on streets?
All right, Charlie.
Okay, we're up to water utility, page 71. Who are you? Go ahead.
No, it's just, I may be jumping ahead, but there's the section here on fire hydrants. So would that be an appropriate spot for Joe's suggestion?
I was going to add it to that same section we were just talking about with the signage and the yellow curb.
The streets,
Just to make the note there. Okay.
Anything else on,
Charlie, just send me any updates you have, because I'm going to try and keep it all in one document from here on out.
Gotcha.
okay, sewer utility?
I haven't made any changes to that since we talked about it the last time, nor the water.
I think the original changes were to require an easement. Was that in the current code? Like, I know when we did Mariners Retreat, there wasn't an easement, and we needed to, I guess in the code there wasn't.
What, like side yard easements and?
Well, for if there's a lateral or a main running down behind the lots.
I've got requirements in here for side and rear and front property.
For
line
just
easement.
standard utility easements for side, front, and rear, and the side would be like 5 feet for a total of 10 feet based on the center line, and the front and rear would be 10 or 15 feet, whatever you needed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Stormwater management system, where do we stand on that? Because that's going to be a,
It's in my court.
pardon?
It's
Yeah,
one of the last things I need to do. Is
I
go through what Tom
I guess what I'm
said.
asking is, can we have it before the next meeting?
Yeah, it's my goal to do that, yeah.
And that one is just clearly to understand what the role the city has in stormwater management, which
Yeah.
is the pipes in the road, Charlie?
Yeah.
Because that's what we have control
Well,
over?
I've got going through Tom's.
Okay.
Did you have more than that in there, Tom?
Well, I was coming at it from the land use side of generating the stormwater, of encouraging the BMPs, the studies that we've talked about.
Yeah.
As some of the standards and guidelines, but it's, that, like with anything, I'm putting that out there.
Yeah, as to like what you're talking about, the storm drain piping, it'll be very similar to the sewer section.
Right, because that's what we legally have control over. I think a lot of the guidelines could be the BMPs into like the rain barrels and the rain gardens.
Yeah, and I think that's the way it was set up.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. But Charlie
That's
has,
good.
Because I just want, this one seems to cause
People think that, yeah,
that we have control over the facilities and the city does not. So I just want to make sure that
I'll have
it's
it ready for.
clarified, because,
in the public presentation, I'd like to make sure that when we come to this area, on the slide, we have something where we're kind of reminding people what the city doesn't control in terms of stormwater. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been a point of contention over the last, let's say, 2 years. Like, there's some folks that think that the city should maybe have a stricter standard than SCD in the state, which I would advise against that, because their standard is well-developed, well thought out. It's really detailed. So anyway, I'm just putting that out, yep. But then I'll have my review ready by next. I wanted to save the best for last.
okay. How kind of you, Charlie.
Charlie, one question for Charlie about language.
Yeah.
Has the term manhole been changed? Is there a different word for that?
Person hall? I don't know.
I don't know. I thought to check with BPW, but I thought it was being renamed to an access.
Yeah,
something or other.
access hole, yeah.
Yeah, vertical access hole, I don't know. Anyway,
I mean, aren't we the family of man?
yes, okay.
So I just think that we'd be really creating a lot of confusion.
We're the family of humanity, so human hole.
Yes,
That could go,
Then you offend the puppies.
okay.
I get what you're,
Okay,
It might be.
yeah. Electrical utility, page 77? Anything?
All BPWs.
Page 79, other utilities.
so I've completely revised it. And I think you've
Natural gas.
included it, right, Tom?
yeah.
yep, it looks like
Yes,
it.
yes, there, yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say I completely revised it. I just added like telephone, natural gas, some good
Cable.
language. What?
Cable? I don't know.
Cable, yeah.
Sorry,
Cable, yeah. I think that was in there already.
I think it was.
Yeah. But no real substantive changes.
Page 79, site, we're now on to Article 5. And at this point, the only changes we
And
have...
just to be nitpicky on the electrical utility, let's just take a moment and think about technology, and is there anything that, could come up, like high fiber? Yeah, is there anything that we possibly overlooked that could be on the horizon here?
It's not that, but we dealt with it with 5G, which is in zoning now.
Right.
The thing on the horizon is that homes supposedly will be, instead of getting the cable and converting to a modem, they'll have like a dish on the side of their house to pick up the 5G signals. But
Right.
that's down the road. It's not, we don't even have 5G in the city yet.
So is it better to include it now and be, even though it's not yet applicable, when applicable, blah, blah, blah?
Yeah, and I don't, from what I've read, I don't even know what it would look like. It's just saying that there will be a shift at some point for people to get Wi-Fi from the air instead of wired into your house and then broadcasting it out. But I mean, DPW looked at doing that at one point for Lewis, is just to broadcast Wi-Fi out, but it's too prohibitive at this point, my
It wouldn't
understanding.
be, not that this matters much, but it wouldn't be underground. It would be above ground. I mean, it probably should, at some point, would be part of this section.
And this section, again, is major subdivisions, so
Correct.
I think it's going to be more of an issue of environmental stuff of all houses. Will they have like a satellite dish on them, or, what's it going to look like? And
Right.
And nothing prohibits us from coming back in like a year or two, and it's like, ooh, that didn't work out the way we thought, and changing it. Because my philosophy on codes is they're constantly being looked at, because if you don't, then they go out of date and you're not going to get what you want. Your expectations are not meeting what the code is. So, there's always that, and it wouldn't be as detailed as this process. That one sounds like it's a much simpler process than kind of rewriting the whole code, but that's just...
I did give it some
thought.
thought. I just couldn't think of anything else that we're running into these days that,
Yeah, there's
should be
The
included in it.
problem too, I think, is that just like with the 5G, we didn't know what the federal legislation was going to look like. So until you know what the federal legislation looks like, it's hard to do something locally to, jive with it, because the federal legislation is going to trump anything we do, if it's inconsistent.
Done. So maybe, I don't know that we will,
You have the date of our next meeting, right?
on developing, just, addressing developing technologies, we will adhere to, I don't know how to word this or address it. It just seems like we don't do this very often, thank goodness, and we don't want to be doing it very often. So, to avoid doing it very often.
The way we usually say that is any deviation or any developing technology is at the discretion of the BPW's review or something like that, sort of real general. I mean, I could add that in there if you want, but actually it might not be too bad to do that, yeah.
That's a good...
Yeah, I can add that in there. Yeah.
Awesome idea, Peter. Yeah, good job.
Great, thanks. I love it.
Probably easier for the BPW to update their standard than it is for the city.
Oh, by the way, the whole fire suppression ordinance now that's with the city, the BPW has developed a whole new standard for how houses get served, new houses, well, all houses, but how they get served to include that fire service. That's developed now and part of their standard specs.
Great. Okay, Article 5, page 79. The first few pages are basically just giving the correct references and so forth, and we get to more content, and putting the city planner in. It's when we get to page 84, we get rid of stuff and just reference the new notification standards. And then
they added a definition to the definitions for JSDRC.
oh, good, okay.
That wasn't there, and they're kind of newer.
Oh, so since we're changing this, can we change how people get appointed? And maybe make them appointed to the Joint Site Development Ad Hoc Review Committee for 6 months?
That's in zoning right now. I mean, we could,
I thought it was in here. Okay, then never mind. I just need to...
actually, I'm sorry, you might be right. Let me double check.
Maybe it is in zoning. I just know it's for that. I would
I
just...
thought I read it in here somewhere
I
there
think it is
too,
in here.
Janelle, and I'm trying to find it.
Me too.
So we put CARC in zoning, and I think joint site
Right,
development. is here.
yeah.
I think it's in page 83.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if you guys are okay with that, I think it's easier for applicants coming in, because right now I can't get an application being heard until January, because I can't get H Park to appoint members until December, and Planning Commission in November. It just, just for some consistency.
So is that under C? Which provision? On 83, I was looking at expiration.
Yeah, it's section 170-37.
Is there language under zoning, though, that then needs to be made consistent with this?
So I think there's
Because we've got the two
zoning
different
that will
rules.
actually, I apologize, I'm interrupting.
No, sir.
There will be zoning that will have to change because of this, so they're more consistent across the board, that we're referencing the correct sections. And that will come way at the end, because if we're going to make any more changes, you don't want to do that until we cross-reference everything.
So this would get added under 170.37. I mean, I don't see the paragraph here.
Yeah, maybe it is in zoning. I just, for some reason, thought it was in here, but it might be.
You're talking about terms of the committee?
Yeah, and
Wouldn't that
how
be-
they're appointed, and
Wouldn't that be towards the front end? 33?
it's just like, because the way it works is every time there's a new site plan application, there's new people reviewing.
Yeah.
And it just makes it hard for the applicant to get heard and for staff to figure out, who's on the committee and getting people appointed, and it adds time to the process. So I was just thinking, if somebody's just appointed for 6 months or that year, then that's your time frame. And I'll find it. If it's not in here, I'll let you know, Tom. It was just, since we were in here.
Could you also look at the references for building official and city planner here, because,
Making sure that the right ones.
yeah, because the administrative, at least before, was done by the building officials.
Yeah, that'll be done. All site plans are being reviewed by me.
Okay.
I think we all agree on 6-month terms, so.
Okay.
Okay, anything else on page 85, 86? 87, we've got one sentence on 87.
We made it through Article 4.
Okay, I think we have now actually made it through all of 170. We still have 2 areas to come. The fees or Glenn's fines and fees or whatnot. What is it called?
Enforcement?
Enforcement, thank you.
That's done, we're
It's
just,
in here.
Okay.
It's incorporated.
so that's covered for now for subdivision.
And then we've got your stuff to come, Charlie, on,
130.
yeah. Should we look at enforcement now then? We only have 5 minutes, I think.
So basically, it talked about the penalties were for
Criminal versus,
And Glenn described that last time, that if it's
Yeah.
where they're not doing notification right, it seemed too extreme. We probably, at some point, the city will look across the board, but for now, we've just left the language that there are penalties, but not criminal penalties for violations of subdivision.
Right, we took out jail time and things like that. What I'd like the city to look toward at some point is creating a separate chapter that deals with civil offenses, and then you go into each chapter throughout the entire code and declare certain things civil offenses. And we'd maybe do that with this, but that's a larger endeavor that would slow this down. So I'd rather just do the amendment that I suggested that takes out some of the criminal type remedies and just go with the more civil type remedies.
So we have our next meeting.
next Wednesday at 1, so November 10th at 1. Did you want to schedule something for the week after that?
Yes.
Okay, so,
Because at the week after that, I'd like us to really spend, next Wednesday, I would like us to do a final version of this. front to back, have it completely done, and we're ready to go with it. That means having a discussion. It means that coming out of that next Wednesday meeting, there may be some edits to the stormwater management, but those can then, I think, easily be made. So then, at the following meeting, I'm hoping that we can spend that meeting really focusing on how we're going to run the public meeting and reviewing the materials for that. Everybody in agreement?
I think that's a good plan.
Okay. So I got my phone back on so I can look at dates.
All right.
Turned it off so I wouldn't get a call.
So we're talking the week of the 15th. How does the 16th look for everybody?
It's good for me.
Except for 10 to 11.
Should we do a 1 to 3 again?
I'm okay with that.
Glenn? Deborah? Tom?
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
wait.
so I'll probably do it remotely if we can.
Yeah.
Okay. I will make that work. 16th at 1. And as we've been talking today, I've been kind of writing down some ideas for the workshop, and if I can run them by you guys and get your feedback real quick.
That would be great.
Definitely we're going to do the PowerPoint presentation, and I figured since we're going 10 to 1, we can repeat it at least twice. I thought one of the tables could be the process, the new versus the old, a table for comments, a table to go over the lighting and the open space, because those are our two new big items. A table to go over the 20 items and where they kind of ended up, going from like, here they were, and this is where they ended up, and this is, if they didn't end up, why. And then I was thinking maybe doing one on the streets, because streets are streets and utilities combined, and if Charlie, you could cover that one and man that one.
If Glenn's got civil engineering background, I think he should do it.
All right, Glenn.
That was a long time ago.
Do those seem to cover the big components?
Can we run me by them again, because I started writing too late. So
No, that's fine.
Process.
Process, lighting and open space combined, the 20 items, public comments.
What's that mean?
Just, we're going to have a table and people can just provide public comments. We'll have forms they can fill out. We've got online they could go to and just submit just any comments.
So they might go to one of the other stations and then go to the public comment station?
I think if they just have general comments, that's where they can go. And I'm thinking we'll have, we've got either boards we can write things down, or people can use a different colored Post-it note for each table, write the comments on the Post-it note, and we can put it on the boards. So then we will have all of those comments collected. And then
I think having it on the Post-its is a lot easier for people.
Yeah.
Writing on the boards is tough.
is tough. I've got 5 different colored Post-it notes, because I'm doing something else, and I've got colored markers, and we've got, if we need the boards, we got the sticky boards. And I can work on the forms, just so they, everybody.
And the big Post-its, since, we have some people who are pretty educated and verbose in Lewis. I don't know, we'll have.
And I would
we'll have
encourage them
comments.
to go to the big paper form for those. Like if they can be a little bit more yes, thank you. Words are not coming out. Thank you. I'm having trouble with words today. To be on the Post-it notes, and we'll have markers and stuff for them to use, and pens, and then the big, if you want to write an essay or a thesis, please come here and provide that information. We're happy to take it, but that's the more appropriate. That's how I'm thinking of that. If that sounds okay with you
It
guys.
sounds very good.
And I thought the process, it would be, I'd do kind of large format of this current process and the proposed process, and stickies, little dots for which one, people prefer. So make it a little interactive and get some feedback. I had to buy the Post-it notes for something else, so.
And then we'll still have at the end an mic and comments, and we'll still begin with a presentation of what's
Yes.
changed. And then have the slideshow running for people to come
Who
later.
said that date?
The 23rd
23rd.
Of November?
of November, it's a Tuesday,
Pretty sure I have it,
10 to 1 at the
You know-
Rowan Center.
I really want to congratulate this committee because there was a time when we weren't sure we could make this 23rd deadline, and the closer we get to it, the more confident I feel that we're going to be ready. And I think it's going to be very valuable for us to have public feedback at this point, and there's still, after this, still going to be work to be done by this committee to, take that feedback in and make revisions and get ready to present to LPC in the new year, so.
And how would you like to present this to the public as the ordinance? Like a clean version of what's being proposed? Or do you want the markup, but a cleaner markup of what's coming out? Or do you not want to provide that at all? I think we need to provide something.
I think we need to
I
provide,
personally think the markup is easier to see the changes in.
yeah.
Okay.
And maybe, do we want to, how are we going to provide it? Are we going to provide it online and ask people to review it? Or are we going to distribute these or have, copies that stay? How are we going to?
So this is my idea, and please give me feedback. This is currently online. And I was thinking, maybe for the lighting and open space section, we have that at the table. So if people want that section, go for it. If Charlie's doing streets and utilities, we have that section there. And then we take Article 4 and put that together and have that there. And kind of hit like the bigger things. And then if, of course, they want the entire thing, I'm not sure if we want to print out all 70 or 80 pages, but we can direct them there. But I think if we do the sections that we're going to have tables for, we can definitely do that. Unless you want to have full sets, we can do that. It is available on the website, and of course will be. And again, I'm trying to match all the tables and like the sections we do here onto the website. I actually have started working on working on that.
No, I think distributing the specific sections at those tables is the best approach on this, just because it's a big document.
Yeah.
It might be, there are people who are going to want the printed copy, so I think just having, a set number on hand or being able to send it to people.
Yeah, I think give us their email address.
We'll have the printed copy without this sidebar and
Yes.
all the comments, so.
Yeah, it'll be, I'd like to get it to where it's just strike through and underline.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a cleaner,
Those are, right now it has underlined all the changes. It
Yeah.
doesn't have strike-through, but I could put that in there. The reason I didn't do strike-through, there's massive sections that are,
that I know that are going away.
and it seemed to make it harder to read, so I thought having the clean copy that was underlined with the new things would make sense, and then they have access to all the things that they can see what's stricken through.
Okay.
Just, I could do it either way.
At one point, I was thinking we would have, Article 1 with the underline, Article 1, the old version, Article 2, and so forth. And the only place where that really becomes valuable is with Article 4, where it's so very changed. So I don't know whether we may want to just have available if people want Article 4, the old version. Because the others, it's really,
You can see where we
you can
added.
see, yeah.
So maybe we break it down by article, like each, a Word document for each, Tom, does that make sense? So then we can clean that, or not clean it up, but make it presentable
Yeah.
for the public. I think those are things we can work on.
Yeah.
And over the next 2
Either
weeks.
way, it's just Article 4, I think.
So huge difference.
I'm afraid when they see everything underlined, they're going to think we didn't have any of this before, and it's more reorganized and,
So break it down, so each article, so we'll just do a PDF. I'll just print it out. Each
Perfect.
article is a
Yeah.
PDF. And then Article 4, try to do a side-by-side.
yeah. Not a side-by-side. Article 4 new, Article 4 old, because it's
Oh,
impossible to do a side-by-side. At least I couldn't figure out.
Yeah.
It's just,
With the strike-through and the reorganization, it can be very overwhelming, even for
Yeah.
a professional, so. lots of things happening, lots of good changes.
I do have one thing I'd like to, as we're approaching the end of the meeting, I believe this is for Charlie. There is now gender-neutral terminology for, a manhole is no longer the current phrase. It is, it's called a maintenance hole.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
It does make sense, but, I mean, I'm all for whatever kind of change like that you want to make. I just don't want to confuse people.
alternately, it can be called a person hole, but I think utility hole or maintenance hole or sewer hole. I think utility hole or sewer hole is probably, or maintenance hole.
Person hole sounds a little.
Yeah, horrible. Maintenance hole sounds like the
The mind wanders.
most broadly accepted.
Formerly known as.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a hard change to make. It's up to you guys. If you want me to make it, I'll put it in there.
There are other, Berkeley, California has made that in their city code. There are other places in America, so.
Whatever you guys want to do.
Is it referred to often?
In my everyday business, it's never referred to anything other than a manhole. Yeah, that,
It's just historically how it's been done.
yeah.
As it came up, I'm just saying that's, I guess the modern terminology for it is
I mean, I don't-
the maintenance hole.
I mean, we're really,
Yeah.
Are we using that, are we using that word a
the
lot?
phrase manhole is meant to, like, discriminate against anybody.
Yeah, that's the last place you actually want to be.
Any other business before we close the meeting down? Okay, well, thank you, everyone, and we'll be back on,
Oh, Bob was
November 10th.
up there.
Yeah, he's been there the whole time.
Okay, gotcha.
oh, Robin's been on, hey?
No, Bob.
Bob.
It's Bob.
Oh, Bob Peppermint, okay, great.
Okay.
Hi, Bob, thanks for sitting in.
Thank you, Bob.
I do have a question, and it's, I think it's in the, motion to adjourn?
Second? I we're adjourned.
I think that this probably was something that came up before I was on board, but,
He wants it off the docket, and so I figured I'd just give him
the removal of this.